The morning mist clung to the riverbank like a shroud, and Eliza May Thornton moved through it as quietly as the deer that sometimes came to drink at dawn. Her basket hung heavy on her arm, filled with yarrow and willow bark she'd gathered before the sun could chase away the dew. At 32, she had learned to make herself invisible, to move through the world like a ghost, seen but not noticed, present but not remembered. Her small cabin sat a quarter-mile from the river, hidden among the cottonwoods and wild roses that grew thick along the water's edge. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and a roof that leaked when the rains came hard. But it was hers. More importantly, it was far enough from the town of Cedar Falls that no one bothered to visit unless they needed her services as a seamstress or herb woman. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the warm September morning. The heavy wool dress she wore covered her from neck to ankle, its dark fabric absorbing the heat that was already building. She'd sewn it herself, as she did all her clothes, with long sleeves that buttoned at the wrist and a high collar that touched her jaw. The townswomen whispered about her strange modesty, but Eliza had learned that whispers were better than questions. Inside the cabin, she set her basket on the rough wooden table and began sorting the herbs. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, separating leaves from stems, bundling the plants to dry. This was her life now. Quiet work, solitary days, and nights spent listening to the river's endless conversation with the stones. She had just begun grinding dried chamomile when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the morning symphony of birds and water. It was labored breathing, harsh and ragged, coming from somewhere near the river. Eliza's hands stilled on the mortar and pestle. Every instinct told her to bar the door, to pretend she'd heard nothing. She'd learned long ago that trouble came in the shape of men, and a man in distress was still a man. But the breathing continued, punctuated now by a low groan that spoke of real pain, despite herself. Eliza found her feet moving toward the door. She took her father's old shotgun from its place beside the fireplace, checking that it was loaded before stepping outside. The mist was lifting, revealing the familiar landscape of rocks and reeds along the riverbank. She followed the sound, her boots silent on the damp earth. 20 yards from her usual water-drawing spot, she found him. He lay half in the shallows, half on the muddy bank, as if he'd crawled from the water and could go no further. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, staining the river pink. His clothes were those of a working man: canvas pants, a torn flannel shirt, leather boots that had seen better days. A gun belt hung loose around his hips, the holster empty. Eliza stood frozen, the shotgun heavy in her hands. She could leave him, should leave him. The river would claim him soon enough, and no one would ever know she'd been here. But as she watched, his eyes opened, gray as winter sky, unfocused with pain but somehow still aware. "Please," he whispered, though she wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to God. The word undid her. How many times had she whispered that same plea into the darkness? How many times had it gone unanswered? Setting the shotgun aside but keeping it within reach, Eliza knelt beside him. His skin was cold despite the fever she could see burning in his cheeks. The wound in his side was ugly, a deep gash that looked like a knife wound rather than a bullet hole. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice rusty from disuse. He tried to push himself up and failed, falling back with a grunt of pain. Eliza looked around, confirming they were alone, then made a decision she knew she'd likely regret. "I'm going to help you," she said, more to herself than to him. "But you try anything, and I'll put you back in this river myself. Understand?" He nodded, or she thought he did. It was hard to tell with the way his head lolled against the mud. Getting him to the cabin was a struggle that left them both gasping. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, and even with him trying to help, Eliza could barely support his weight. They stumbled and staggered through the trees, her dress soaking through with his blood and river water. By the time they reached her door, her arms were shaking with effort. She managed to get him onto her bed, the first time a man had been there since she'd fled to this place 3 years ago. The thought made her hands tremble as she cut away his shirt to examine the wound. The knife had gone deep, but seemed to have missed anything vital. She'd seen worse, though not on a living man, as she worked, cleaning the wound with whiskey, stitching it closed with threads she usually reserved for fine embroidery, binding it with strips torn from an old petticoat. He drifted in and out of consciousness. He mumbled things she couldn't understand, names, perhaps, or prayers. Once, his hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong. "Thank you," he said clearly, his gray eyes focusing on her face for a moment before the fever pulled him under again. Eliza pulled her hand free, disturbed by the contact. She finished bandaging the wound and covered him with her one good quilt. Then she dragged her rocking chair to the far corner of the room, loaded the shotgun, and settled in to wait. He woke properly near sunset, his eyes clearing as they found her in the corner. She saw him taking the shotgun across her lap, the distance she'd put between them, the way she'd positioned herself between him and the door. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Men have said that to me before." Eliza replied, not moving. Something in her tone must have told him not to press. He simply nodded and looked around the sparse cabin, taking in the herbs hanging from the rafters, the simple furniture, the absence of any personal touches save for a small sampler on the wall embroidered with Bible verses. "I'm Cole," he said finally. "Cole Harland. I worked for the Double Bar Ranch, about 20 miles north of here." Eliza said nothing, waiting. "We were bringing supplies back from Fort Laramie. Bandits hit us in Devil's Canyon, killed Tom and Miguel, took the horses and wagon. I got this," he gestured weakly at his bandaged side, "and ran, made it to the river, followed it south. Don't remember much after that." It had the ring of truth, though Eliza had learned not to trust her judgment where men were concerned. Still, she couldn't very well throw him out in his condition. "You can stay until you're healed enough to travel," she said. "There's water in the pitcher, broth on the stove. I'll sleep in the other room." "I don't even know your name," he said as she stood to leave. She paused at the doorway, considering. "Eliza," she said finally, giving him only that much. "Thank you, Eliza." She nodded and closed the door between them, sliding the bolt home. In the small front room that served as both kitchen and workspace, she sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. What had she done? Years of careful solitude, of hard-won peace, and she'd invited danger right through her door. Through the thin walls, she could hear him shifting on the bed, groaning softly as movement pulled at his stitches. He was hurt, alone, and far from home. She knew what that felt like, but she also knew that wounded animals were the most dangerous, and men were just another kind of animal when it came down to it. As darkness fell over the river valley, Eliza built up the fire and settled onto the narrow cot she'd dragged in from the storage shed. She kept the shotgun close and her ears open, listening to every sound from the other room. But gradually, exhaustion won out over vigilance, and she slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of blood in the water and gray eyes that saw too much. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Cole Harland proved to be a considerate patient, never demanding more than what Eliza offered, never pushing against the boundaries she'd set. He stayed in the bed for the first 3 days, too weak to do more than eat the simple meals she brought him and sleep. On the 4th day, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale but determined. "I need to move around," he said when she appeared in the doorway with fresh bandages. "Can't get my strength back lying flat." Eliza studied him from across the room. His color was better, though dark circles still shadowed his eyes. "You'll tear the stitches." "I'll be careful." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been hurt before. Know my limits." She set the bandages on the small table by the bed. "There's a bench outside, under the oak. You can sit there for a spell, but no wandering, and take the walking stick by the door." The gratitude in his expression made her uncomfortable. She busied herself with changing his bandage, trying not to notice the scars that marked his chest and arms, old wounds that spoke of a violent past. Her fingers worked quickly, efficiently, but when she accidentally brushed against unmarked skin, they both flinched. "Sorry," she murmured, though she wasn't sure which of them she was apologizing to. Outside. Cole lowered himself carefully onto the bench, his face tight with the effort. Eliza went back to her work, grinding herbs and mixing tinctures, but she found her gaze drawn to the window where she could see him. He sat very still, face turned up to catch the autumn sun, and there was something in his stillness that she recognized, the careful conservation of energy that came from long acquaintance with pain. That evening, she found him still there as shadows lengthened across the yard. "You'll catch a chill," she said, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "Been a long time since I sat quiet like this," he said. "Forgot how loud the world is when you stop to listen." Eliza knew what he meant. The river sang its endless song, joined by the evening chorus of crickets and the rustle of leaves beginning their autumn turn. "Most folks don't care for the quiet," she observed. "Most folks are afraid of their own thoughts." He glanced at her, then away. "You're not from around here originally. Your accent, somewhere back east." She stiffened. "That's not your concern." "No, ma'am, it's not." He struggled to his feet, waving off her instinctive move to help. "I'll mind my own business." But as the days passed and his strength returned, some of the wariness between them eased. Cole began helping with small tasks, splitting kindling with careful movements that favored his healing side, fetching water from the river, tending the small fire she kept burning for her herb preparations. He worked in silence mostly, but sometimes she'd catch him humming under his breath, old songs she half remembered from a lifetime ago. One afternoon, she returned from gathering roots to find he'd repaired the loose board on her front step, noticed it was fixing to give way, he said, not meeting her eyes. "Found some nails in that old shed." "Thank you," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. When was the last time she'd had reason to thank anyone? He started to respond, then stopped, his attention caught by something. Eliza followed his gaze to where her sleeve had ridden up as she set down her basket, revealing a lattice of old scars on her forearm. She quickly pulled the fabric down, her face burning. "Eliza," he began, "your supper's ready." She interrupted, her voice sharp. "Eat it while it's hot." That night, the first real storm of autumn rolled in from the mountains. Thunder shook the small cabin, and rain hammered against the roof, finding every weakness. Eliza set out pots and buckets to catch the worst of the leaks, moving through the familiar routine by lamplight. A particularly violent crack of thunder made her jump, and she heard movement from the other room. Cole appeared in the doorway, favoring his injured side. "Need help?" he asked. "I've managed fine on my own for 3 years," she said, then bit her lip at the unintended revelation. 3 years, he repeated softly. "That's a long time to be alone. I prefer it that way." She positioned another pot under a steady drip. "People are complicated. That they are." He moved to help despite her protest, holding a bucket steady while she positioned it. Though sometimes complicated is just another word for hurt. The lamplight caught his face, highlighting the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. She guessed him to be perhaps 40, maybe a few years younger, old enough to have accumulated his own share of complications. "You ever been married?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Once, long time ago." His voice was carefully neutral. "She died in childbirth, along with the baby. After that, I figured I wasn't meant for that kind of life." "I'm sorry," Eliza said, meaning it. "It was 15 years ago. Pain fades if you let it." He studied her face. "Though I reckon you know something about that." She turned away, busying herself with adjusting another pot. "We should check the roof come morning, see what needs patching." He accepted the change of subject without comment, and they worked together until the worst of the leaks were contained. When he finally returned to his room, Eliza sat by the dying fire, listening to the storm and thinking about scars and time and the strange comfort of another human presence in her small, careful world. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having washed the air clean. Eliza found Cole already outside, studying the roof with a critical eye. "You've got some rot in those shingles," he said. "I could fix it proper, but I'd need supplies from town." "No." The word came out harsher than she'd intended. "I mean, it's held this long. It'll hold a while longer." He looked at her curiously, but didn't press. "What about that corral fence? I could mend that with what you've got here." She wanted to refuse, to maintain the careful distance between them. But winter was coming, and the fence did need fixing if she hoped to trade herbs for a milk cow come spring. "I suppose that would be all right." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. "I'll start after breakfast. It's good to have useful work to do." As she watched him walk toward the old shed where she kept tools, Eliza felt something shift inside her chest. A loosening of bonds she'd tied so tight she'd forgotten they were there. It frightened her more than any storm. That afternoon, while Cole worked on the fence, a rider appeared on the trail that led to town. Eliza saw him first, her body going rigid with old fear. But the man merely touched his hat and called out, "Afternoon, ma'am. Looking for a fellow might have come this way. Tall, dark hair, probably hurt. Goes by Cole Harland." Before she could answer, Cole emerged from behind the cabin, his hand resting casual-like near where his gun would have been. "That'd be me, Jim. Though I'm surprised to see you this far south." The rider, Jim, broke into a grin. "Cole, damn. We thought you were dead for sure. Boss sent me and 2 others to look for what the bandits left behind." His expression sobered. "We buried Tom and Miguel proper." "Good. They deserved that much." Cole glanced at Eliza. "Jim, this is Mrs. Thornton. She saved my life." "Ma'am." Jim touched his hat again. "The double bar owes you a debt. Boss said to bring Cole back soon as I found him. Got your horse at the camp. Cole, that gray of yours found his way home with an empty saddle." Eliza felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Of course he would leave. She'd known that from the start. Men always left, one way or another. "I'll need another day or 2, Cole said, still healing up. Jim looked between them, and something in his expression made Eliza's cheeks burn. Sure. I'll camp by the river tonight. Head back in the morning to tell the boss you're alive. You can follow when you're ready." He grinned. "Mary'll be glad to hear it. She's been lighting candles for you at the church." After Jim left, an awkward silence settled between them. Cole went back to working on the fence, but his movements were different now, more forceful, almost angry. Eliza retreated inside, telling herself she was glad. His leaving would restore her quiet life, her safe solitude. That night, she found him sitting by the fire she'd built outside to render fat for soap. The flames painted his face in gold and shadow. "Mary's a good woman," he said without preamble. "Wife of one of the other hands. Lights candles for all us heathens." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I wasn't trying to deceive you, if that's what you're thinking." "I wasn't thinking anything." Eliza lied. "This place." He gestured at the cabin, the river, the vast sky above them. "It's peaceful. A man could forget there's a whole world out there waiting to chew him up again." "Then why go back?" He looked at her across the fire. "Same reason you stay hidden away here, I reckon, because it's what we know how to do." The truth of it stung. She pulled her shawl tighter and stood to leave, but his voice stopped her. "I've seen those scars you're hiding. Eliza, not all of them, but enough." His voice was gentle, without judgment. "Whoever hurt you that way, husband, I'm guessing, he's the one who should be ashamed, not you." She stood frozen, her back to him, hands clenched in the wool of her shawl. "You don't know anything about it. I know you survived. That takes a particular kind of strength." She heard him stand, heard his footsteps approach but stop a respectful distance away. "I know you could have left me by that river, but you didn't, And I know you're about the bravest woman I've ever met, even if you don't see it that way." Eliza fled then, back to the safety of the cabin, but his words followed her into the dark. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 3 years, she wept, not from pain or fear, but from the terrible ache of being seen. The morning after Jim's visit found Eliza up before dawn, moving through her daily routines with mechanical precision. She milked the goat, gathered eggs from her 3 hens, and set bread to rise, all while avoiding the window that looked out toward the shed where Cole had made his temporary quarters. But when she finally ventured outside to tend her herb garden, she found him sitting on the bench under the oak, his packed saddlebags at his feet. "You're leaving then," she said, her voice carefully flat. He looked up, and she was struck by the weariness in his eyes. "Figured it was time. You've done more than enough for a stranger." "Your wound hasn't fully healed." "Healed enough." He stood slowly, favoring his injured side. "I left some money on the table. It's not near what I owe you, but I don't want your money." The words came out sharp, angry. She took a breath, forced her tone to soften. "You don't owe me anything." They stood there, 2 people caught in the amber light of early morning, neither quite meeting the other's eyes. Finally, Cole picked up his bags. "I best get going. Jim will be waiting." He'd made it halfway across the yard when Eliza heard herself speak. "Cole." He turned, hope flickering across his features. "That night, what you said about the scars." She wrapped her arms around herself, a poor shield against the memories. "You were right. It was my husband, Franklin Thornton. He owned the Thornton Mining Company, up near Leadville." Cole set down his bags, waiting. "He was 20 years older than me. My father owed him money, and marrying me cleared the debt." The words felt like stones in her mouth. "Franklin had particular ideas about wives and obedience. When I disappointed him, which was often, he'd remind me of my place." She saw Cole's hands clench into fists, but he remained silent. "The scars you saw on my arm, those were from the first year. Later, he got more creative. Hot oil from the kitchen, fireplace pokers, things that wouldn't show when I wore proper clothes to church." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Everyone thought he was such a God-fearing man, generous with his tithes. First to volunteer for town committees." "What happened to him?" Cole's voice was carefully controlled. "There was a fire at the mine, an explosion in one of the shafts. They said it was a gas pocket, but—" She met his eyes for the first time. "I'd been stealing small amounts of blasting powder for months, hiding it away. That night, he was drunk, worse than usual. He'd heated the poker until it glowed. Said he was going to brand me like the cattle, so everyone would know I belonged to him." Cole remained perfectly still, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "I told him I'd put something in his whiskey, that he was going to die. It was a lie. I was just trying to frighten him, but he believed it. Went racing off to the mine office where he kept his medical supplies, saying he'd pump his stomach and then come back to finish with me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The explosion happened an hour later. 11 men died because Franklin Thornton thought his wife had poisoned him. Those men died because of an accident." Cole said firmly. "You didn't set that fire. Didn't I? If I hadn't told that lie, he would have hurt you worse than ever before, maybe killed you." Cole took a step closer. "You're not responsible for his choices, Eliza. The whole town thought I was— They couldn't prove anything, but they knew. The grieving widow who inherited everything, whose bruises were suddenly visible at the funeral because I couldn't bear to wear those high collars anymore." She laughed again, harsh and broken. "I sold what I could, took the money, and ran. Bought this place from an old trapper who wanted to go live with his daughter in California, and I've been hiding here ever since." "That's not hiding," Cole said. "That's surviving." The dam broke then. 3 years of carefully controlled emotion came flooding out, and Eliza found herself sobbing, great, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She was dimly aware of Cole approaching, of him stopping just out of reach. "Can I—" he began, and she nodded, unable to speak. His arms came around her carefully, as if she might shatter. She tensed at first. It had been so long since anyone had touched her with kindness, but then she let herself lean into the solid warmth of him. He smelled of leather and wood smoke and something uniquely his own. One of his hands came up to cradle the back of her head, and she felt him press his lips to her hair. "You're safe," he murmured. "You're safe now." They stayed that way until her sobs quieted to hiccups, until the sun climbed higher and the morning chill gave way to autumn warmth. Finally, embarrassed by her display, Eliza pulled back. "I'm sorry, I don't usually. Don't apologize. Not for that. Not ever." He studied her face, and she resisted the urge to hide. "Thank you for telling me. I know what it cost you." She wiped her cheeks with her sleeve, trying to gather the scattered pieces of her composure. "You should go. Jim's waiting." "To hell with Jim." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. Cole ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly uncertain. "I mean, would it be all right if I stayed? Just a bit longer. The fence isn't quite finished, and there's that leak in the roof. You have a job, a life. I've been working cattle for 20 years. Eliza, the double bar can spare me a few more days." He paused. "Unless you want me to go. Say the word, and I'll leave right now." She should say it. Should send him away before this became something neither of them could control. But looking at him standing there in her yard, his bags at his feet and his heart in his eyes, she found she couldn't. "The roof does need fixing," she said quietly. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after a long, dark night. "I'll need to go to town for supplies. Would you come with me? I could use your advice on materials." The thought of town, of faces and whispers and judgment, made her stomach clench, but Cole was looking at her with such hope, and she was so tired of being afraid. "I suppose I could," she heard herself say. "But we go early, before the town busybodies are about. Dawn it is." He picked up his bags, but instead of heading toward the trail, he walked back to the shed. "I'll get started on making a list of what we need." Eliza watched him go, touching her fingers to her cheek where the salt of her tears had dried. She felt raw, exposed, as if she'd peeled back her skin to show him the very bones of her. But underneath the fear was something else, a warmth she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten its name. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating the rabbit stew she'd made, Cole told her his own story, about the war and the things he'd done in the name of duty that haunted him still, about the Cherokee boy he'd shot in a skirmish in the Indian Territory, thinking he was a scout for the enemy. "Couldn't have been more than 12, he said, staring into the flames. "Was reaching for something in his pouch. I thought it was a weapon. Turned out to be a carved wooden horse. Probably made it for his little brother or sister." His voice roughened. I can still see his eyes, the surprise in them as he fell. Eliza reached across the space between them, covering his hand with hers. He turned his palm up, interlacing their fingers, and they sat in silence as the fire burned down to embers. "We're a pair, aren't we?" he said finally. "Two people carrying ghosts. Maybe that's why you stayed," she said softly. "Like calls to like. Maybe." He squeezed her hand gently. "Or maybe I stayed because I looked at you that first morning, pointing that shotgun at me with your hands shaking but your eyes steady, and thought, now there's a woman with steel in her spine. I was terrified. But you helped anyway. That's what courage is. Eliza, being scared and doing what needs doing regardless." They talked until the stars came out, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never spoken aloud before. When Eliza finally retired to her room, she felt lighter somehow, as if telling her truth had released something that had been slowly poisoning her from within. Through the thin wall, she could hear Cole settling in for the night, the rustle of blankets and the creak of the old cot. For the first time in 3 years, the sound of another person in her space didn't frighten her. Instead, it made her feel something she'd thought she'd never feel again. Not quite safe. Not yet, but no longer entirely alone. Tomorrow, they would go to town, and she would face the stares and whispers she'd run from. But tonight, with the memory of Cole's arms around her and his understanding in her heart, she thought maybe, just maybe, she was ready to stop running. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it a series of storms that turned the world white and silent. The first heavy snow caught them unprepared, despite their trip to town for supplies. Cole had barely finished patching the roof when the sky opened up, dropping 2 feet of snow in as many days. "Looks like I'm stuck here a while longer," he said, standing in the doorway and surveying the white landscape. But there was no regret in his voice, only a quiet satisfaction that made Eliza's heart skip. They fell into new rhythms, shaped by the demands of winter. Each morning, Cole would break ice on the water barrels and check on the animals while Eliza prepared breakfast. They'd work separately through the day, him chopping wood and reinforcing the shelter they'd built for her goat and chickens, her preserving the last of the autumn vegetables and keeping the fire going. But come evening, they'd sit together by the hearth, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing the comfortable silence. The first time they ran out of firewood near the house. Cole insisted on going alone to cut more from the woodpile by the river. The storm had picked up again, and Eliza watched anxiously from the window as he disappeared into the swirling white. An hour passed, then 2. The storm grew worse, until she could barely see past the porch. Fear clawed at her throat, the same fear she'd felt watching Franklin leave for the mine that last night, though this time it was born of care rather than desperate hope. When Cole finally stumbled through the door, covered in snow and shaking with cold, Eliza didn't think. She flew to him, helping him strip off his frozen outer clothes, rubbing feeling back into his hands. "Got turned around," he said through chattering teeth. "Couldn't see the cabin. Thought I was done for until I heard you calling." "I wasn't calling," Eliza said, confused. "Sure you were. Heard you clear as day, saying my name." She hadn't spoken aloud, but she'd been praying, something she hadn't done in years, praying for his safe return, for one more chance to tell him. What? She didn't let herself finish the thought. That night, as the storm raged outside, Cole developed a fever. Eliza moved him to her bed over his weak protests and spent the dark hours bathing his forehead with cool cloths, spooning willow bark tea between his lips. Somewhere in the depths of the night, he caught her hand. "Stay," he mumbled, his eyes glazed with fever. "Don't leave me, Eliza. I'm not going anywhere." She promised, and meant it. By morning, the fever had broken. Cole woke to find Eliza asleep in the chair beside the bed, her hand still clasped in his. He studied her face in the pale dawn light, the purple shadows under her eyes, the worry lines that hadn't quite smoothed in sleep, the way her dark hair had escaped its usual severe bun to curl around her shoulders. "You're staring," she said without opening her eyes. "You're worth staring at." She did open her eyes then, heat flooding her cheeks. "The fever's made you delirious." "Maybe." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I've been thinking it for weeks now." They looked at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Eliza pulled her hand free and stood, busying herself with checking his temperature. "You need to eat something. I'll make porridge." But Cole caught her wrist as she turned to go. "Eliza, we can't keep dancing around this." "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." His thumb traced gentle circles on her wrist. "I care for you, more than care, and unless I'm reading things wrong, you are." She pulled free, wrapping her arms around herself. "You're grateful, that's all. Once you leave, who says I'm leaving?" The question hung in the air between them. Eliza stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You have to. Your job is pushing cattle for other men's profit. I've got some money saved, enough to buy a small spread, maybe raise some horses." He sat up carefully, his gray eyes intent on her face. "The question is, would you want a neighbor?" "Cole, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give." "Eliza, If neighbors is all we can be, then that's enough. But I'm tired of drifting. Tired of being alone." He paused. "Aren't you?" She fled then, as she always did when things became too real. Too close. But as she stood at the stove, stirring porridge with shaking hands, she could feel the shape of her life changing, like ice beginning to crack on the river in spring. The storms continued, sealing them in their small world. They developed a dozen small intimacies. The way Cole took his coffee, how Eliza hummed while she worked, the sound of their mingled laughter when he told stories of cattle drives gone wrong. Once, passing behind her chair, he brushed his fingers across her shoulder, and she found herself leaning into the touch instead of away. One evening, as they sat reading by the fire, he had a battered copy of Ivanhoe. She was mending a shirt. Eliza found herself watching his hands as they turned the pages. Strong hands, calloused from work, but gentle too. She'd seen that gentleness when he tended the animals, when he handled her precious books, when he'd held her while she cried. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her stare. "Nothing," she said automatically, then stopped. Wasn't she tired of lies, even small ones? "Your hands. I was thinking about your hands." He set the book aside, looking at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "What about them?" "They're kind hands," she said simply. He stood slowly, crossing to kneel beside her chair. "Eliza," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "May I?" She knew what he was asking. Her whole body trembled, caught between desire and fear, but looking into his eyes, those steady gray eyes that had never shown her anything but patience and understanding, she nodded. His kiss was everything Franklin's had never been. Soft, tentative, asking rather than taking. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away the tears she hadn't realized had fallen. When he pulled back, they were both breathing unsteadily. "Too much?" he asked. She shook her head, unable to speak. He smiled then, that rare, transformative smile, and kissed her again. This time, she kissed him back, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair. And for a moment, the past loosened its grip on her, but only for a moment. When his hand moved to her collar, she froze, her whole body going rigid. Cole immediately pulled back, his face full of understanding and not a trace of frustration. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then returned to his chair. "We have all the time in the world. Eliza, no rushing." But the spell was broken. Eliza excused herself early, lying in her narrow bed and staring at the ceiling. She wanted him. That was the terrifying truth. Wanted his hands, his mouth, his solid warmth beside her. But wanting and being able to have were two different things. Her body remembered too much, carried too many memories of when touch meant pain. Through the wall, she could hear him getting ready for bed. The sounds were familiar now, comforting even. She'd grown so used to his presence that the thought of him leaving, even to a neighboring ranch, made her chest tight with panic. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Eliza, you all right?" She sat up, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. "Come in." He stood in the doorway, not entering fully. "I pushed too hard. I'm sorry. You didn't. She struggled for words. "It's been a long time since I wanted." She gave up, gesturing helplessly. "I know." He leaned against the door frame. "For what it's worth. It's been a long time for me too, not since my wife. You must have been lonely." "I was, but lonely was safe. Couldn't hurt anyone. Couldn't be hurt." He met her eyes. "Then I met a woman brave enough to save a stranger's life, and all that safety started looking like cowardice." They looked at each other across the small room, two damaged souls recognizing something essential in each other. "I'm scared," Eliza admitted. "So am I," Cole said. "But maybe that's all right. Maybe being scared together is better than being safe alone." After he left, Eliza lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. Outside, the storm was finally breaking up, and through her window she could see stars appearing between the clouds. Change was coming with the spring thaw. She could feel it in her bones. The question was whether she'd have the courage to meet it. In the shed, Cole lay awake on his cot, remembering the taste of her lips, the way she'd melted into him for those precious seconds before fear reclaimed her. He'd wait, he decided. Wait as long as it took for her to trust him. Trust herself. Some things were worth waiting for, and Eliza May Thornton was one of them. The winter had more trials in store. Blizzards that lasted days. Temperatures that dropped so low the water froze solid in the buckets. Nights when the wind howled like a living thing. But they faced them together now. And in that togetherness, both began to believe that spring might bring more than just a thaw. The spring thaw came gradually. Then, all at once, one morning Eliza woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves, and by afternoon, the yard was a muddy mess of melting snow and emerging earth. Cole had started work on the old corral, reinforcing posts and replacing rotted rails, his movements sure and steady despite the months of winter inactivity. "Thought I might ride to the double bar tomorrow," he said over supper. "Let them know I'm alive, collect my wages, maybe see about buying a couple of horses." Eliza's hand stilled on her cup. They'd lived in such isolation these past months that she'd almost forgotten the outside world existed. "Of course, you must have obligations." "No obligations, just tying up loose ends." He studied her face. "Would you come with me? To the ranch?" The idea terrified her. All those people, those questions. "Just for the ride. You could wait by the creek while I handle my business. It's beautiful country, and you've been cooped up all winter." She wanted to refuse, but something in his expression stopped her. He'd been patient all winter, never pushing, never asking for more than she could give. Maybe it was time she gave something back. "All right," she heard herself say. His smile was reward enough for her courage. They set out early the next morning, Eliza riding her old mare while Cole had borrowed Jim's gelding. The world was transforming around them, patches of green showing through the snow, birds returning to fill the air with song. Eliza found herself relaxing in the saddle, remembering how she used to love riding before Franklin had decided it was unladylike. "You ride well," Cole observed, pulling alongside her. "My father taught me. He was a horse trader before." She trailed off, not wanting to darken the bright morning with sad memories. "Tell me about him. The good parts." So she did, sharing stories of her childhood she hadn't thought of in years. How her father would let her help train the young horses. How her mother would pack picnic lunches for their rides into the countryside. Cole listened, occasionally sharing his own memories, and the miles passed easily. When they reached the creek near the double bar, Cole dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "I won't be long. There's a nice spot over there under the willows, if you want to rest." But Eliza found she couldn't sit still. She walked along the creek, gathering early wildflowers, trying not to think about what Cole was doing. Was he really just collecting wages? Or was he saying goodbye properly, preparing to resume his old life? She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the horses approaching until they were almost upon her. 3 riders, ranch hands by the look of them, reined in near where she stood. "Well, well," the leader said, a lean man with cold blue eyes. "What's a pretty lady doing out here all alone?" Eliza's hand went to the small pistol Cole had insisted she carry, but she kept it holstered. "Waiting for someone. He'll be along shortly." "That so?" The man dismounted, his companions following suit. "Maybe we'll wait with you, keep you company." Fear crawled up her spine, but she forced herself to stand straight. "That won't be necessary. Now don't be unfriendly." He stepped closer, and she could smell whiskey on his breath. "We're just being neighborly." "The lady said she doesn't need company." Cole's voice came from behind her, steady and dangerous. She'd never been so glad to hear anyone in her life. The leader turned, his hand dropping to his gun. "Cole Harland, heard you were dead." Disappointed. "Brock?" "Can't say I am, though I'm surprised to find you with a woman. Thought you'd sworn off the gentle sex." Brock's eyes slid back to Eliza, and something in his expression made her skin crawl. "This your new whore?" The word had barely left his mouth when Cole's fist connected with his jaw. Brock went down hard, and his companions reached for their guns, but Cole already had his drawn. "Either of you boys want to join him, you're welcome to try. Otherwise, get him on his horse and get out of here." They complied, hauling the groggy Brock to his feet. As they rode off, Brock called back, "This ain't over, Harland." "It is unless you want me to finish it permanent," Cole replied. When they were gone, he turned to Eliza, his face tight with concern. "Are you all right? Did they touch you?" "No, I'm fine," but her hands were shaking as she reached for him. "Who was that?" "Brock Daniels. We've had run-ins before. He's got a mean streak, especially with women." Cole holstered his gun and pulled her close. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left you alone." "You couldn't have known." She leaned into his strength, letting it steady her. "Is this what it would be like, if you stayed? Men like that, causing trouble?" He was quiet for a moment. "I won't lie to you. My past isn't pretty, and there are those who'd like to see me pay for things I've done, but I'd never let them touch you. Eliza, never." She pulled back to look at his face. "I know." They rode home in companionable silence, but Eliza's mind was churning. The encounter with Brock had shaken her, but not in the way she'd expected. She'd been frightened, yes, but she hadn't frozen, hadn't fallen apart. And when Cole had appeared, her first feeling hadn't been fear of violence, but relief at his presence. That evening, as they tended the horses, she found herself watching him work. The easy way he moved, the gentle hands that could turn deadly when needed. He was dangerous, she realized. But not to her, never to her. "Eliza," he'd noticed her staring. "What is it?" "I was thinking about today, about how you protected me." "Always will," he said simply. "I know." She took a deep breath. "Franklin used to say he was protecting me too. From other men, from the world, from myself. But it was just another kind of cage." Cole set down the brush he'd been using and came to stand before her. "I'm not him." "No," she agreed. "You're not." She reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw where he'd hit Brock. "Does it hurt? Worth it to shut his filthy mouth?" "Cole." She struggled for words. I think I'm ready." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Eliza, we don't have to." "I know, but I want to. I'm tired of letting fear rule my life. Tired of letting Franklin still have power over me, even from the grave." She met his gaze steadily. "I want to choose you. Choose this, if you'll have me." His hands came up to frame her face, infinitely gentle. "If I'll have you, woman. I've been yours since the day you pointed that shotgun at me." She laughed, surprising herself. "I was terrified." "So was I. Terrified I'd die before I got to know the brave woman behind the gun." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Eliza felt something inside her finally break free. When they parted, she took his hand and led him toward the house. "Are you sure?" he asked at the door to her room. "I'm sure." Inside, with the lamp turned low and the spring breeze stirring the curtains, Eliza began unbuttoning her dress. Her hands shook, but not from fear this time. Cole watched her, his eyes full of wonder and something deeper, something that made her feel beautiful despite the scars she knew he'd see. When she hesitated at her chemise, he stepped forward. "Let me see you, Eliza, all of you." She closed her eyes and nodded, felt his fingers, feather-light, tracing the marks on her back, heard his sharp intake of breath. But when she opened her eyes, there was no pity in his face, only rage at the man who'd hurt her and a tenderness that made her throat tight. "You're beautiful," he said, and the way he said it made her believe him. When he removed his own shirt, revealing his collection of scars, she understood. They were both marked by life, by violence and loss. But here, together, those marks didn't define them. They made love slowly, carefully, with a tenderness that was its own kind of passion. Cole was patient, letting her set the pace, watching her face for any sign of distress. But there was none. For the first time in her life, Eliza understood that this could be beautiful, could be about giving rather than taking, about trust rather than power. Afterward, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For waiting, for seeing me as more than my scars." His arms tightened around her. "You're the strongest person I know. Eliza May, scars just prove you survived." She lifted her head to look at him. "What happens now?" "Now," he smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "now we build a life, together. If you'll have me, I meant what I said about buying land nearby. We can take it slow, court proper-like. Or," he paused, suddenly uncertain, "or I could stay here, if you'd let me." "Stay," she said without hesitation. "Stay forever. Forever's a long time, not long enough." They kissed again, and outside the window, the moon rose over the mountains, blessing their new beginning with silver light. The past would always be with them, in scars and memories and the occasional nightmare, but it no longer had the power to define their future. That night, for the first time in years, Eliza slept deeply and dreamlessly, safe in the arms of a man who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and chosen to stay, and Cole, holding her close, felt the restless, wandering spirit that had driven him for so long finally find its home. The peace they'd found in each other's arms lasted exactly 3 weeks. Then Silas Thornton arrived. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching, a man in a black suit despite the warm spring day, his horse picking its way carefully along the muddy trail. Something about his posture, rigid and self-important, sent ice through her veins. "Cole," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. He emerged from the barn where he'd been working, took one look at her face, and moved to stand beside her. His hand rested casually near his gun. The rider stopped a respectful distance away, touching his hat. "Mrs. Thornton?" "Mrs. Eliza Thornton." "Who's asking?" Cole responded before she could. "Silas Thornton, attorney at law. I represent the interests of the late Franklin Thornton's estate." His eyes, the same cold blue as Franklin's, fixed on Eliza. "I'm his cousin. We have matters to discuss regarding your inheritance." "There's nothing to discuss," Eliza said, finding her voice. "Franklin left everything to me. The will was clear." "Ah, but was it legal?" Silas dismounted, pulling papers from his saddlebag. "You see, I've been investigating the circumstances of my cousin's death. The timing was quite convenient. A man threatens his wife, then dies in a mysterious explosion before he can carry out that threat." "Are you accusing my wife of something?" Cole stepped forward, and there was danger in every line of his body. Silas's eyes sharpened. "Your wife? How interesting. The grieving widow remarries so quickly." He made a note on his papers. "That won't look good in court. We're not—" Eliza began, then stopped. Let him think what he wanted. "The sheriff in Leadville has reopened the investigation." Silas continued smoothly. "Several witnesses have come forward with new information. They remember seeing you near the mine that night. Mrs. Thornton. They remember bruises on your face at the funeral. A jury might find that very interesting." "Get off this property," Cole said quietly. "Now. I'll go, but I'll be back. With the sheriff." Silas mounted his horse, looking down at them with Franklin's cold smile. "You have 2 choices. Mrs. Thornton, sign over the estate to its rightful heirs, Franklin's family, or face trial for murder. I'll give you a week to decide." After he left, Eliza sank onto the porch steps, her legs unable to hold her. Cole sat beside her, pulling her against his side. "He can't prove anything," Cole said. "You didn't kill Franklin. Doesn't matter. A woman inheriting after her husband's suspicious death? They'll convict me on principle." She laughed bitterly. "I should have known it was too good to last. Stop that." Cole turned her to face him. "We're not giving up. There has to be another way." But what way? Eliza spent the next days in a haze of fear. jumping at every sound, expecting to see the sheriff riding up at any moment. Cole tried to maintain normalcy, but she caught him checking his guns, riding the property boundaries, standing watch at night. On the fourth day, unexpected help arrived. A buggy struggled up the muddy trail, carrying 2 women, one elderly and regal, the other young and nervous. Eliza recognized them with a shock. Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, the banker's wife from Leadville, and her daughter Catherine. Mrs. Morrison? Eliza stood frozen on the porch. "What are you doing here?" The older woman climbed down with difficulty, waving off Cole's offer of help. "What I should have done 3 years ago? May we come in?" Inside, Mrs. Morrison settled herself in Eliza's best chair like a queen granting an audience. Catherine perched nervously beside her, darting glances at Eliza. "Tea would be lovely, dear," Mrs. Morrison said, as if this were a social call. Eliza mechanically prepared tea, her mind racing. Why were they here? What did they want? When they were all seated, Mrs. Morrison spoke. "Silas Thornton visited me last week. Wanted to know if I'd testify about Franklin's character, paint him as a loving husband wronged by an ungrateful wife." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "And I told him I'd be happy to testify about the bruises I saw at church, about the times you claimed to be clumsy, about how Franklin would grip your arm hard enough to leave marks when he thought no one was looking." The older woman's eyes were fierce. "I told him I'd testify about every single thing I saw and said nothing about, to my eternal shame." "Mother saw it all," Catherine added quietly. "We all did. The women, we knew, but—" She trailed off, twisting her hands. "But Franklin was rich and powerful. And what could we do?" Mrs. Morrison's voice was bitter. "That's what we told ourselves. And then he died. And you disappeared. And we told ourselves it was for the best." "So why now?" Cole asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Because Silas is just like Franklin. Because he's already talking about the reforms he'll make when he controls the mine. Because his wife Sarah came to me with bruises last month, begging for help." Mrs. Morrison met Eliza's eyes. "Because I'm 73 years old, and I'll not go to my grave with more silence on my conscience." Eliza felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "They won't believe you. A woman's word against a man's. One woman's word. No, but I've spent the week visiting, talking, remembering." Mrs. Morrison smiled grimly. "Sarah Thornton will testify about Silas. Mary Henshaw saw Franklin strike you behind the church once. Dr. Morrison, my nephew, treated your injuries more than once and kept records, despite Franklin's threats. Even Reverend Douglas is prepared to speak about the counseling he tried to give Franklin about his temper." "They'll do this? Risk their reputations?" "Some debts can only be paid with courage, however late it comes." Mrs. Morrison reached across to pat Eliza's hand. "You weren't alone then, even if it felt like it. You're not alone now." Catherine spoke up. "There's more. I work at the county clerk's office now. I found something interesting in the mine records. The night Franklin died, there were 3 other explosions at mines in the county, a bad batch of blasting powder from a supplier in Denver. The mining commission ruled them all accidents." "Silas knows this?" Cole asked. "He should. He was Franklin's lawyer. He filed the insurance claims." Catherine's usually timid face hardened. "He's known all along you couldn't have caused that explosion." They stayed another hour, planning strategy. By the time the women left, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. That night, as she and Cole sat by the fire, she said, "I can't believe they came. After all this time." "People surprise you sometimes." Cole said, "Question is, what do we do now?" "We fight." The words felt strange in her mouth, but right. "I'm tired of running, tired of hiding. If they want a trial, they'll get one." Cole smiled, that fierce, proud smile that made her heart race. "That's my girl." 2 days later, Silas returned as promised, but not alone. Sheriff McKay rode with him, along with Brock Daniels and 2 other deputies. Eliza recognized the setup. Silas had been busy buying allies. "Mrs. Thornton," the sheriff said, not unkindly. "I'm afraid you'll need to come with us. There's been a formal accusation." "Based on what evidence?" Cole interrupted. "Based on the testimony of concerned citizens," Silas said smoothly. "Several men have come forward saying they saw Mrs. Thornton near the mine that night." "What men?" Eliza asked, though she could guess. Silas would have found those willing to lie for money or favors. "That'll come out at trial." Brock grinned. "Though I doubt you'll last that long. A lot of accidents happen in jail." "That's enough, Daniels," the sheriff said sharply. He looked uncomfortable, and Eliza wondered if he'd been bought or merely pressured. "I'll come," Eliza said, standing straight. "But I want it on record that I'm coming voluntarily, and I expect to be treated with dignity." "Of course," the sheriff said, shooting a warning look at his deputies. As they prepared to leave, Cole caught her hands. "I'll get you the best lawyer money can buy. This isn't over." "I know." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his touch. "Take care of the place. I'll be back. Count on it." As they rode away, Eliza looked back once at the cabin by the river, at Cole standing on the porch like a guardian. She'd been dragged away from one life already, but this time, she had something to fight for. This time, she had someone worth coming back to. The last thing she saw before the trail turned was Cole mounting his horse. He'd fight for her. She knew, and for the first time in her life, she had people willing to stand with her. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The jail cell in Cedar Falls was cold and damp, but Eliza had endured worse. She sat on the narrow bunk, her back straight, refusing to show the fear that clawed at her insides. Through the barred window, she could hear the town coming alive, merchants opening shops, children playing, normal life continuing while hers hung in the balance. On the second day, Cole arrived with a lawyer from Denver, Mr. James Whitman, a silver-haired man with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. He listened intently as Eliza told her story, occasionally interrupting with pointed questions. "Mrs. Morrison has already given her deposition," he said when she finished, "as have 6 other women. The doctor provided medical records. We have a strong defense. Mrs. Thornton. But I won't lie to you. Silas has been busy too. He's produced 3 men who claim they saw you near the mine that night." "They're lying," Eliza said flatly. "Of course they are, but proving that is another matter." Whitman adjusted his spectacles. "Tell me about the blasting powder. Did Franklin keep any at the house?" "No, he was very particular about that. All explosives stayed at the mine." She frowned, remembering. "He was afraid of accidents. Ironic, considering—" "Indeed." Whitman made a note. "Mr. Harland has been investigating the powder supplier. It seems there were several complaints about quality in the months before the accidents. Franklin himself filed one." "He did?" "The records were buried, but yes, he complained that a shipment was unstable, demanded a refund." Whitman smiled thinly. Silas Thornton was the lawyer who handled that complaint. The trial date was set for 2 weeks hence. Cole visited every day, bringing news from outside. The town was divided. Some believed Silas's version of a greedy wife murdering for money. Others remembered Franklin's temper and Eliza's bruises. The women, in particular, were vocal in their support, led by Mrs. Morrison's formidable presence. "She's organized a committee," Cole told her, a hint of amusement in his voice. "The Ladies' Association for Justice. They meet at the church every evening. Reverend Douglas tried to discourage them, but Mrs. Morrison told him that if God didn't want women seeking justice, he wouldn't have given them voices." "Despite everything," Eliza laughed, "I wish I had her courage." "You do," Cole said seriously. "You survived Franklin. You saved my life. You're facing this instead of running. That's more courage than most people show in a lifetime." On the day of the trial, the courthouse was packed. Eliza sat beside Mr. Whitman, acutely aware of every stare, every whisper, across the aisle. Silas conferred with the prosecutor, his confidence evident in every gesture. The prosecutor opened with a dramatic tale of greed and murder, painting Eliza as a calculating woman who'd married for money and killed when her husband threatened to divorce her. The 3 witnesses testified as expected, claiming to have seen her near the mine shortly before the explosion. But when Whitman's turn came, their stories began to unravel. Under cross-examination, one admitted he'd been drinking heavily that night. Another couldn't explain why he'd waited 3 years to come forward. The third, under pressure, finally admitted that Silas had offered to forgive his substantial debt to Franklin's estate in exchange for testimony. Then came Eliza's witnesses, Mrs. Morrison took the stand like an avenging angel, her testimony about Franklin's treatment of his wife drawing gasps from the crowd. Doctor. Morrison's medical records were even more damning. Broken ribs, dislocated shoulders, burns that could only have come from deliberate application of hot objects. "Why didn't you report this?" the prosecutor demanded. "Because Franklin Thornton owned half this town," the doctor replied steadily. "Because he told me he'd ruin my practice if I said anything, because I was a coward. But I kept the records, hoping someday they might matter." Sarah Thornton's testimony about her husband Silas drew parallels that made several jury members shift uncomfortably. Catherine presented the Mining Commission's reports on the faulty blasting powder. Even Reverend Douglas, clearly uncomfortable but determined, testified about Franklin's refusal to seek help for his violent temper. When Eliza finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Whitman led her through her story with gentle questions, but it was the prosecutor's cross-examination that truly mattered. "You hated your husband, didn't you?" he pressed. "I feared him," Eliza corrected. "There's a difference." "But you wanted him dead." She was quiet for a long moment, then met his eyes directly. "I wanted to be free. I wanted the pain to stop, but I didn't kill him. Yet you fled immediately after his death. The action of a guilty woman, surely. The action of a woman who'd been blamed for everything her whole marriage. I knew how it would look. I knew his family would come." She glanced at Silas. "I was right. You inherit everything if you're acquitted, correct? I inherited everything 3 years ago. I've touched almost none of it, living simply by the river. If I wanted wealth, would I have chosen that life?" The prosecutor had no answer for that. Cole testified last, speaking simply about finding Eliza, about her fear, about the woman he'd come to know. "She still has nightmares," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Still flinches sometimes when someone moves too quick. That's not the reaction of a woman who killed in cold blood. That's someone who's been hurt so much she expects more hurt." In his closing argument, Whitman presented the final piece of evidence, Franklin's own letter to the powder supplier, warning that their product was dangerously unstable. "The man knew the danger," he said. "He complained about it. Yet Silas Thornton would have you believe Eliza somehow used this same unstable powder to commit precise murder, that she somehow knew it would explode that particular night? The truth is simpler and sadder. Franklin Thornton died in an industrial accident, one of 4 that week, all traced to the same bad powder." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they filed back in, Eliza gripped Cole's hand so tight her knuckles went white. "We find the defendant not guilty of all charges." The courtroom erupted. Women cheered. Silas stormed out with threats of appeal, and Eliza sagged against Cole, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're free." But the ordeal wasn't quite finished. As they left the courthouse, Brock Daniels blocked their path, his face ugly with drink and anger. "This ain't justice," he snarled. "Murdering witch got away with it, and now she's making fools of decent men." He never finished the sentence. Cole's fist connected solidly, and Brock went down in the dusty street. When he struggled up, reaching for his gun, Sheriff McKay stepped between them. "That's enough. Daniels, you're drunk and disorderly. Spend the night in jail cooling off." He looked at Cole and Eliza. "You folks best head home. This'll blow over, but maybe stay clear of town for a bit." They didn't need the advice. As soon as Eliza collected her few belongings from the jail, they headed for the cabin. The ride was quiet, both processing all that had happened. As they crested the final hill and saw the river valley spread before them, Eliza finally spoke. "They believed me. After all this time, they believed the truth. Truth has a way of coming out." Cole said, "Sometimes it just needs help." That evening, as they sat by their own fire again, Eliza made a decision. "I want to use Franklin's money," she said suddenly. Cole looked at her in surprise. "For what?" "To help other women. Women like I was, like Sarah Thornton. A place they can go. People who believe them." She met his eyes. "I couldn't save myself then, but maybe I can help save others now." "That's a fine idea," Cole said. "A fine legacy from a bad situation. Will you help me?" "Every step of the way." As the stars came out over the river, Eliza felt the last chains of her past finally break. She'd faced her accusers, told her truth, and been believed. The scars would always be there, inside and out, but they no longer defined her. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words coming easier now. Cole pulled her close. "And I love you. Have since you pointed that shotgun at me. I wasn't really going to shoot you. I know. Your hands were shaking too bad to hit anything." He kissed the top of her head. "Good thing, too. Would have been a shame to die before I got to know you." They sat together as the fire died to embers, planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. There would be challenges. Silas wouldn't give up easily. And there were those who'd never believe Eliza's innocence. But she'd faced worse and survived. Tomorrow, she'd write to Mrs. Morrison about her plans for helping women. She'd visit Sarah Thornton, make sure she was safe. She'd begin the work of turning Franklin's blood money into something good. But tonight, she simply sat with the man who'd seen her scars and stayed anyway, who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The river sang its ancient song, and for the first time in her life, Eliza Thornton truly believed in the possibility of happiness. The summer that followed was one of transformation. Cole and Eliza worked side by side to expand the cabin, adding rooms that would serve as temporary shelter for women in need. The work was hard under the blazing sun, but there was joy in building something together, in watching their shared dream take physical form. Word of Eliza's plans had spread through the mysterious networks that women maintained beneath the surface of society. The first to arrive was Anna Kowalski, barely 18, with bruises fading to yellow on her arms and a baby on her hip. She spoke little English and less about what had driven her from the mining camp where her husband worked. But Eliza didn't need words to understand. "You're safe here," she told Anna, helping her settle into the newly finished room. "As long as you need." Cole built a cradle for the baby while Anna watched with wonder. "Most men," she started, then shook her head. "He is different. Your man." "Yes," Eliza agreed simply. "He is." By autumn, they'd sheltered 6 women. Some stayed only days before moving on to relatives in other territories. Others, like Anna, lingered longer, helping with the garden and the endless work of running what had become an unofficial refuge. Cole taught them to shoot, over Eliza's initial protests. "Every woman should know how to defend herself," he said firmly. "The world won't always be kind." Dr. Morrison's nephew Thomas began visiting regularly, ostensibly to check on the women's health, but increasingly drawn to Anna's quiet strength. Eliza watched their careful courtship with a mixture of hope and worry. "She's not ready," she told Cole one evening as they watched Thomas help Anna with the evening milking. "Maybe not," Cole agreed. "But she's healing. That's what this place is for, isn't it? Second chances." The first snow of winter brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah Thornton arrived in a hired wagon, her possessions piled high, her face bearing the hollow look Eliza knew too well. "Silas is dead," she said without preamble. "Shot in a dispute over a card game. I'm free, but—" She looked around at the expanded cabin, the small compound they'd created. "I heard what you're doing here. I want to help." She'd brought money, not just her inheritance from Silas, but contributions from other women in Leadville. "Mrs. Morrison sends her regards." Sarah said, "And this?" She handed over a bank draft that made Eliza's eyes widen. "The Ladies' Association for Justice has been busy. With the funds, they built a proper dormitory, a schoolroom where Eliza taught reading and writing to those who'd never had the chance to learn, and a workshop where the women could learn trades beyond domestic service." Sarah proved invaluable, her education and social connections opening doors that might have remained closed. One day in early spring, as Eliza was teaching a lesson on basic arithmetic, Cole appeared in the doorway. "Someone to see you," he said, his expression unreadable. Outside stood a young woman, well-dressed but travel-worn. It took Eliza a moment to recognize her. "Martha, one of the servants from Franklin's house." "Mrs. Thornton," Martha said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew what he did to you. We all did, but we were scared. And—" "Hush," Eliza said, pulling the girl into an embrace. "You were young. We were all scared." Martha had come to warn them. "There's talk in Leadville. Some of the mine owners don't like what you're doing. They say you're giving women ideas, making them uppity. They're planning something." The attack came 3 nights later. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke and Cole's urgent shaking. "Fire! Get everyone out!" They evacuated the buildings with practiced efficiency. This was not the first emergency they'd faced, but as they stood in the yard watching flames consume the workshop, Eliza saw riders disappearing into the darkness. "Let them go," Cole said when some of the women wanted to pursue. "The building can be rebuilt. Lives can't." Sheriff McKay arrived at dawn, genuinely apologetic. "I'll investigate, but without witnesses—" "We are witnesses," Anna said firmly, her English much improved. "We saw the men. We know them." In the end, it wasn't the law that brought justice, but the women of the territory. The wives of the mine owners, led by the indomitable Mrs. Morrison, made their displeasure known. Donations poured in to rebuild. The sheriff, facing pressure from unexpected quarters, arrested 2 men who'd bragged about the arson in a saloon. Change is never easy. "Mrs. Morrison told Eliza as they watched the new workshop rising. "But it's happening, one woman at a time." The day Cole found Eliza by the river, she was sitting in the exact spot where she'd discovered him 4 years earlier. The afternoon sun painted the water gold, and she was so lost in thought she didn't hear his approach. "Remembering?" he asked, settling beside her. "Thinking how different everything is, how different I am." She leaned into him. "That terrified woman who dragged you from this river, sometimes I barely recognize her." "I do," Cole said. "Same strength, same kindness. You just let it show now." "Cole." She turned to face him, suddenly nervous. "I have something to tell you." His face went carefully neutral, and she realized he was bracing for bad news. The knowledge that this strong, steady man could still fear losing her made her heart ache with tenderness. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. The joy that transformed his features was beautiful to see. He pulled her close, his hands trembling slightly as they settled on her still flat belly. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Are you happy? Happy?" He kissed her deeply. "Eliza, I never thought I'd have this, any of this. A home, a purpose, a woman I love more than life itself. And now a child? I'm not just happy. I'm blessed." They were married a month later in a simple ceremony by the river. The women they'd helped stood as witnesses, along with Mrs. Morrison, Dr. Thomas and Anna, now courting openly, and even Sheriff McKay, who'd become an unlikely ally. "Do you take this woman?" Reverend Douglas asked Cole. "I took her the day she saved my life," Cole answered, making everyone laugh through their tears. "But yes, I'll take her again today and every day after." The baby came with the first snow of winter, a daughter with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Hope. "She'll grow up free," Eliza whispered, watching their daughter sleep, never knowing fear in her own home, never wondering if she deserves love. "She'll grow up strong," Cole agreed, like her mother. The refuge continued to grow. They added a medical clinic with Thomas as the attending physician, a legal aid office staffed by young lawyers willing to take cases others wouldn't touch. Women came from across the territory, some fleeing violence, others seeking education or simply a fresh start. Not everything was perfect. There were setbacks, women who returned to their abusers, battles lost in court, nights when the weight of all that pain seemed too much to bear. But there were victories too. Anna's wedding to Thomas, performed in the garden she'd helped plant. Sarah's acceptance into law school back east, determined to fight for women's rights with education as her weapon. The day little Jamie Cooper's mother stood up in court and testified against her husband, knowing she had a safe place to return to. 5 years after that first meeting by the river, Eliza stood in the doorway of what had become known as Haven House, watching Cole teach their daughter to ride. Hope sat fearlessly on the gentle mare, her laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Mama, look," she called. "I'm flying." "I see you, sweet girl," Eliza called back. Sarah appeared at her elbow, home from law school for a visit. "You've built something remarkable here," she said. "We all built it," Eliza corrected. "Every woman who found the courage to leave, to speak up, to help another, we built it together." That night, as they sat by the river, Cole, Eliza, and Hope sleepy in her father's arms, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The scars remained, hidden beneath her clothes and deeper still in her heart, but they no longer defined her. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked, as he so often did. "That broken things can heal," she said. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best. That love isn't just possible after trauma. Sometimes it's even stronger for having been tested." He kissed her temple. "You always were philosophical by the water. And you always were romantic when you thought I wasn't paying attention." They laughed quietly, not wanting to wake Hope. Above them, stars reflected in the river that had brought them together, that had seen her at her lowest and witnessed her rise. The same river that now carried the laughter of children playing, the voices of women learning they were worth more than they'd been told, the sound of lives being rebuilt one day at a time. "Thank you," Eliza whispered, not sure if she was addressing Cole, the river, or perhaps God himself. "For what?" Cole asked. "For seeing me, for staying, for helping me build a life worth living." "Thank you for saving mine," he replied. "In more ways than one." As they made their way back to the house, Hope stirring sleepily in Cole's arms, Eliza paused to look back at the river one more time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women seeking shelter, new battles to fight. But tonight, she was simply a woman who had survived, thrived, and learned that the human heart's capacity for healing was as endless as the river's flow. The scars would always be part of her story, but they were no longer the ending, merely the beginning of something stronger, something beautiful born from pain. And as she followed her family home, Eliza May Thornton Harland knew with certainty that the best revenge against those who had tried to break her was this: a life lived fully, freely, and without apology. In the distance, the river sang its eternal song, carrying their story downstream to inspire others who might need to know that survival was possible, that love could bloom in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the very thing that should have destroyed you becomes the foundation for saving others. Thank you so much for joining me on this emotional journey through Eliza and Cole's story. I hope their tale of resilience, healing, and love has touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts. Your comments mean the world to me, and they help me know what kinds of stories resonate with you. Until next time, partners.